I do believe very much that somehow the negotiation itself it is seen as a game of power in the contract manufacturing,
Mm,
and it is truly just a collaboration and nothing more. There is not a giver and a taker. If any negotiation has an outcome. It's a deal. It is a contract most of the time. It is a supply agreement. And if there is this element of win-win missing,
mhm,
the possibility of a long-term relationship is very low.
mm,
So as soon as things that are not properly negotiated in both favors, right? There is not a true for both parties, but there is something that you probably may want more than I wanted, and there is a proper, decent, and trustworthy exchange.
mhm,
Now, negotiation skills in the pharma contract manufacturing are absolutely vital because you need to establish terms. Terms have to be very clear, especially in such a regulated industry as pharmaceutical industry. You need to ensure quality compliance, and you have to be able to really write this down in order to be able to measure, because really what you can measure, you have it done, right?
mm,
You need to be able to manage costs. You need to be able to manage all the portion of the contracts on the liabilities, so the expectations, right? You need to balance the risks and the opportunities and to have it documented.
mhm,
Now, literally a proper negotiation, it's having the foundation on a strong partnership. A partnership, you can already see it from the moment where the negotiation starts. There will always be some critical tensions, but the job of the negotiators from both parties, it is really to align, to advocate for their organizations in order to establish this win-win conversation, which will give afterwards, a possibility of the long-term arrangement, the long-term partnership. This is what we see in negotiations, right, with other parties. There is a huge part that is hidden in negotiations. For example, if I'm negotiating with you, Luke, for whatever arrangement we want to have in the future, there is a portion of the demands I will make to you that you do not know where this is coming from. And usually it's coming from your own organization, right?
mhm.
So there is, I would say the negotiator, it's always in the middle. It's in a sandwich between, the outside world, the negotiating party, and also the inside world where you need to align your stakeholders in order to support your negotiation. Otherwise, you are not going to be successful. Depending very much on what the manufacturing agreement is, um, there are different manufacturing agreements, but literally it depends on what is the statement of work, what that agreement covers, in terms of work.
Mm,
For example, for a biologics drug substance, a contract would look completely different in terms of capacity, forecasting, liabilities.
mhm.
It's going to look completely different than what is going to look on a packaging supply agreement or even a sterile drug product,
Yeah.
vials and syringes, supply agreement. There is, though, the same reaction everywhere, every time. There are some commonalities. One of them, it is the COGS, cost of goods.
Mhm,
They are important, and I think folks, I never understood why this is the case. You just go into the contract negotiations, you have been running a sourcing exercise in the brightest details, right? And you have been choosing to go with that supplier based obviously on the cost as well. And it's coming up over and over again in the contract negotiations. When you are setting the tier pricing, for example, based on the capacity, most of the time, the procurement um, negotiator will want to have some changes. And
Mm.
I personally find this, it's like you are waking up, you had the train to catch at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you are waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning. The SBB here in Switzerland, for example, so the guys which are running the railways are not going to return that train for you in
Mm.
order for you to make it at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's coming as well, again, it is an element of respect. And I think we all should know our inquiries limits, right? There are things that contract manufacturing is able to give you, and there are things they can't because
Mm.
they have hundreds of customers, hundreds, right?
Mm.
For sure, medium-sized companies like the sterile manufacturing in Germany or the other ones in the US, they have for sure over 120 customer base. So they simply have to have a standardized set of values. For example, a liability cannot be higher. A liability is um, practically the penalty they have to pay you back
Mhm.
in case something is going wrong, in case a batch is destroyed or the raw materials are not taken care of, if there is a cyber security threat, if anything is happening, they have to be protected, and they are protected to a certain extent under insurance, but they can't cover the entire risk, right?
Mm.
So let me give you a very concrete example. Um, if you have to manufacture a monoclonal antibody, or even worse, an antibody drug conjugate, which is so difficult to manufacture,
Mm.
the starting materials, I will not even go into cell and gene therapy, which is completely another story. And the supply agreements look, again, completely different because the life cycle is much more accelerated and you have to be able to act. And if the contract sometimes is stopping you acting, right? Because you have to go through the steps of arbitration, for example. So coming back to the example of monoclonal antibodies or antibody drug conjugates, um, the initial the raw materials are extremely
Mm.
expensive. If anything is happening to that raw materials, first of all, it's implying it's impacting your supply, and sometimes the CMO, the contract manufacturing organization, cannot cover that the entire cost. Or if something is happening during the production and the pharmaceutical company has all the rights to be very upset and to complain because it's impacting the patients at the end of the day, right? Or the inventory levels, which are very important for any biopharmaceutical company. Um, the contract manufacturing cannot stand for the entire amount of what the batch would have costed, right? For
Mhm.
example, an antibody drug conjugate batch of, let's say, at 5,000 liters, not an antibody drug conjugate, I would say one step before the monoclonal antibody, before you conjugate it with the cytotoxic small molecule. Something like this, a monoclonal antibody batch, depending obviously on the process, it costs for 5,000 liters in between 3 millions to maybe 6 million
Mm.
US dollars. So it is terribly expensive, right? The contract manufacturing, if anything, if there is any failure on that batch, the contract manufacturing organization, it's simply not able to cover the entire value of the batch.
Mm.
Because if 2, 3 batches are happening like this, they will simply run out of the business, run out of cash.
Difficult conversation to have as a client with your superiors to say, we've because of the contract
Exactly.
manufacturer. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's exactly right. I have been hearing and having tremendous pressure, from the stakeholders on recouping the entire losses, and
Yeah.
even additional penalties because it's impacting the supply. And that's why it is so important that we understand the entire picture, right? And I'm a big advocate of pen and paper. I'm a big advocate. You will see me in all the negotiations with a whiteboard going and write them down.
Mm,
So I believe you immediately. If you are telling me it's true, I just wanted to have it written down because on that moment you see the entire picture. You can't tell me, hey, give me 3 millions and it's done deal and let's close the contract. Maybe 3 millions is not enough. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too little.
mm,
So, and there are different type of penalties, right? Different type of liabilities. If you have recall, it's quite a big deal, right? For a biopharmaceutical company. What are you going to do? Are you going to inquire again the entire value? No, that company has to cap themselves. They have to protect themselves. And they will give you something, to be punished as a sign of punishment,
mm.
but they will definitely not cover the entire value. I think it is also, that's what I said before, that the negotiator is in the middle. It is my job, our jobs, especially in procurement, to make it very clear to the stakeholders, and that pressure that these are the limits of the negotiations.
Yep.
It's the best you can do, and this is the worst you can do. And with these limits, you have to make it work.
Hmm.
But again, the pen and paper, the fact that you go there with facts and data and put all the emotion and your wishes aside and the stakeholders' wishes aside, I think the fact that people are, I never, literally never, have been unsuccessful when I have been sending my Excel file or a presentation before a negotiation.
Mm,
I promise you that presentation has been open and they have been said, Roxana, we can give you point 1, 4, and 6 out of 7 points, but we cannot. We have to negotiate 2, 3 because this is too extreme for us.
hmm.
So preparation is definitely another one step.
And what goes into that presentation that you send before a negotiation? What are the typical things that you lay out in advance? And what do you hold back?
So there are some things which are very important depending on the project, right? It's very important for the company, and it is our job to protect that piece. Most of the time, again, depending on the platform technologies, um, again, to make a monoclonal antibodies probably is taking 6 to 8 months. Okay,
Mm,
so it's taking a huge amount of time. So you need to plan and replan accordingly as you have to provide the demand forecast accordingly. So that I would, in that moment, the capacity reservations, for example, will look completely different than if we are looking for a pill or a capsule, or even a packaging where there is much more flexibility.
mhm,
Um, what do I put on that presentation? The most important are what is the most important for you. I'm calling these major points in a contract with a big M and minor points in the contracts. Major points are the points which are just increasing the risk based on that contract, that supply contract, are increasing the risk of your um, pharmaceutical company to a level that it becomes extremely dangerous.
mhm,
And then there is an entire mechanism behind that risk. Any contract which is increasing the risk of the company corporate is going to alarm, the auditors, is going to be, because it has to be SOX compliance, it's going to be heavily investigated, um, and is going to impact, the treasury and the cash flow practically because you need to keep. It's the same for the contract manufacturing organizations. When the risk is very high, you need to have, let me put it very simple, enough money in the bank to be able to pay the penalties or immediately to replace that batch.
mm,
Um, so that presentation contains what is super important for depending on the project and definitely, zones where we can negotiate things that are important, but I am able to negotiate or I'm willing to negotiate, to discuss, not to negotiate. And better we say we should remove this negotiate. To negotiate, we love it so much, but in the fact it is to collaborate, to discuss it, collaborate, because it is
Mm.
a collaboration, right? Um,
It
at,
should
at the
be.
end,
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So this is what I would put in on the presentations, and definitely, especially from the procurement side, you always go there with the calculator. You always go
Yes.
there with, something that you can calculate immediately. Um,
Mm.
because you have to be also prepared sometimes of surprises.
Yeah. We should probably start with the basics actually. So what would you say the key elements are for a good contract manufacturing contract? What would you say those main points are that you'd want to cover?
So they are, I would call them three pillars, right?
Okay.
Is how I like to design it in my head. Um, First of all, it is the technical or technological piece. You have to have the statement of work, what it is, what's the product, how much you want from it, the quantities, the specifications, the markets,
Mm.
super important because you need to, this is highly regulated industry. You need to have the GMP, all the quality control standards. Um, then you will have, did I say, the supply chain part, all the minimum order quantities, all the tiers that you want, or the campaigning, for example. You might have this because you have some advantages. If you are campaigning, the prices should go down. Um, then you have the regulatory and the other part, all the innovations, continuous improvement, the sustainability piece, right? The EHS, which is very important as well. Then you have a second pillar, which I would call the obligations, right?
Okay.
Um, Obligations is like the third party IP liability, super important. What is happening in a case of a recall? How the governance is working
Mm.
in these extreme cases. And definitely you have indemnifications, you have liabilities, which are multiple types, as I said before. And um, there is another third pillar, which I call, the typical, you would see this in any contracts, the payment terms, in how many days I have to pay the supplier, Incoterms, how is that shipment delivered? Very important as well, dispute resolutions, chain management, and the term and termination, which, to my surprise, many people are forgetting about this.
Mm.
The term probably not, but the termination provisions, it's super important, and I don't really understand how this can be forgotten. Because with all the look at mergers and acquisitions and what is happening today, right? If you are changing the control of a company, that is not a given that you have a
Yeah.
legacy of the contracts, right?